Welcome to the Terrible Podcast with your hosts from SteelersDepot.com, where you can find all your latest and greatest Steelers news. It's Dave Bryan and Alex Kozora, always lit, talking Steelers. And now, here's Dave and Alex.
Welcome to the Terrible Podcast, Season 17, Episode 3. He's Dave Bryan. I'm Alex Kozora, SteelersDepot.com. Thanks for being back with us this Monday, Steelers Nation Day. 1 week down, couple more to go, and the pads come on Monday for the Pittsburgh Steelers as they resume training camp 11 a.m. on Monday. Maybe by the time people have listened to this, the pads have already been popping, and our report is already done for the first day of a padded practice at St. Vincent College. So a lot to go over. Dave, how you doing?
Yeah, happy. Actually, we're recording this, as we told the folks the other day, Sunday evening here, and I don't know what time this will go up, maybe around midnight or so people can get a jump on the day, being as how Monday will indeed be a busy day at St. Vincent College with the team returning to practice and getting the pads on for the first time in 2026. I know you're looking forward to that, and you had Sunday able to take your Noxzema baths and all like that, get your skin. Get your skin all ready for the sun again next week there. And I guess it sounds like the weather will be pretty nice here to start off the week. I guess you're looked ahead. Wednesday and Thursday might be a little questionable and all, but we'll let Mother Nature decide all that on her own. And we do know that you'll be back out there. Look forward to your training camp report on Monday night following the first padded practice. Interested to find out if they do any backs on backers and just how the level of, kind of maybe the level of the physicality maybe increasing to some degree, or at least as much as they can without having live tackling.
It's a day I think everyone looks forward to, players, coaches, fans, and the Pat McAfee Show will be on location for Monday, and so it'll be, I'm sure, very busy with player interviews. I'm sure Aaron Rodgers will speak, Mike McCarthy. I don't know exactly how the schedule is going to go, but they'll be on hand. It'll only add to, I think, the intrigue of the day. All right, Dave, before we get into training camp and kind of recapping the headlines and what to watch for throughout this padded week, let's talk about some roster shuffling. The first of training camp Pittsburgh has made. It's pretty notable. We knew that Rayshawn Jenkins was going to be signed a couple days ago. That was reported. He was going to come in and give this team some depth. We didn't know the corresponding move. We now know that the move has been made official. Jenkins signing a one-year deal, and to make room for him on the then full 91-man roster, the team released veteran safety Darnell Savage, who had signed back in June. So one safety enters, another exits, both vets. Pretty surprised to see Savage get to heave-ho. Not sure the situation there. Don't believe there was an injury designation attached to his release, and so he seemed to be healthy, although, as we noted, he did not practice the last 2 days of training camp practice in the team periods, and so I wonder what all is happening there. But bottom line is, Savage out, Jenkins in.
That's why we have you as the eyes and ears out there, Alex, for you being able to notate who looks like they might be going, might be able to practice and who's not practicing. As you mentioned, the last few days, Darnell Savage not going there. So you kind of had a wonder in the back of your head, maybe if Savage would be the corresponding move for Jenkins. And indeed, that was wound up being the case there. It's now official, as you stated, by the team on Sunday afternoon there. Darnell Savage Jr. did not have any guaranteed money in his contract, but he did stand to earn $187,500 bonus if he had made the 53-man roster there. So officially termed a termination of the contract by the NFL sheet on Sunday afternoon. Out the door he goes. In comes Rayshawn Jenkins. I imagine his is another veteran benefit contract as well there. So I don't expect any, I wouldn't think there are going to be any adjustments as far as salary cap or anything like that goes there. And look, you look back at Darnell Savage and you remember how early in the offseason there was the word that he was going to sign with the Steelers. And then what did it go? 3 months, Alex, or?
Yeah, it was first in March, right after free agency opened up, or shortly after, and then early June he officially signed.
All right, and some of that, I think the speculation was him trying to get healthy enough or get over whatever injury he was before they make the signing official. And, obviously that finally happened later on in the summer. It just makes you wonder if maybe whatever he was dealing with didn't get fully recovered at this point to only make it through the few practices that he did, and then to be sidelined that he did, or like he was. I mean, that's obviously was something was going on there. I mean, yes, it could have been some sort of other injury, maybe overcompensating. Who knows? But the fact of the matter is, we hardly got to know you, Darnell Savage, and I guess now we'll wait and see if he is able to get himself healthy and maybe perhaps surface closer to the start of the season, either with with another team, or maybe on the Steelers practice squad, or something along those lines there. But this is a guy that you thought maybe might have had an outside chance of making the 53-man roster this year. Probably more outside the bubble than being right on the bubble type of guy. But then in the same breath, there you kind of thought that if he didn't make the 53-man roster, could this be a potential veteran practice squad candidate for the Steelers come the start of the regular season? And as we sit here right now, that kind of looks out of the picture right now as well there too. So as you kind of had highlighted, with all the defensive backs either out of practice, well, obviously PUP, we don't know really, with Porter, if that's contract. I imagine it's contract related, but for whatever reason, they've got they had the three defensive backs not practicing, and Joey Porter Jr., Jalen Ramsey, and Dante Kent. And then, with Savage sitting out the last couple practices there, the lines at safety got a little bit thin. I think even you notated, a couple of those, even the rookie there was getting a few snaps with the first team there. So it makes sense to bring in Jenkins here, who's an experienced guy, cheap guy. Played last year, I think, with the Browns. Unfortunately, the first thing I thought of when the word came out that Jenkins was going to be signing with the Steelers was that awful taunting penalty against the Steelers last year. But there's a little bit more to him than that. He's obviously been around the league for a few years now. Versatile safety, a little bit longer in the tooth. I think 30, 31, somewhere around that age there. So at least this gives the Steelers another experienced body at the safety position to compete as we move forward in training camp.
Sure. What's done is done. Savage, just to button that up, he did go through individual work and individual period stuff during Saturday's practice. So he did dress, but was not working fully. Deshaun Elliott also has been a partial participant in the 11-on-11 team periods, probably sat out more than he's worked in. And so they were getting kind of thinner, where it did kind of vault a rookie 7th rounder, Robert Spears Jennings, in the first team work. So the team probably recognizing that. So to focus on Jenkins, like you said, experience, 140 career games, over 90 starts. Was a longtime starter for the Chargers and Jaguars. Spent last year in Cleveland, as you noted, played in all 17 games, has a bunch of special team snaps on his resume as well. He's physical. He's a hitter, kind of like an older version of Jaquan Brisker. He's 32, Jenkins is, and so near the end of his career. But he's always been a hitter. I remember, and I just checked it before the podcast. I wrote about him coming out of Miami. I wrote the scouting report on Rayshawn Jenkins. It's how long I've been doing this thing for, how long the site's been around, and noted the same thing. He's physical, impactful hitter, best as a box safety, not as adept in coverage. And so could Pittsburgh be looking for more free safety help? Probably a consideration. Get a bunch of box type of guys, Brisker and Elliott and now Jenkins into the fold, but getting some veteran depth and a guy that has a chance to make the 53.
I think, I guess this team has been fortunate overall. I mean, this is the first transaction that we've seen since the start of training camp, right? Normally by now you have a couple of guys waived, as injured, a couple of these younger guys, and usually the laundry list for the housekeeping portion of podcast is usually takes up about 5 minutes to start the show along those lines there. So they've been fortunate, at least when it comes to that. And the fact that here we are on the have 4 practices underneath their belt at this point, and this is the first transaction that we're talking about. That's not the norm.
Right, don't jinx it. You're going to get a bunch of emails saying you just jinxed it, Dave. And obviously the practices have not been much contact and they've not been in pads, but you can still pull hamstrings, a lot of soft tissue injuries that occur. Look around the NFL and just freak stuff that tends to happen. So obviously this week may change that story. Probably will be a busier roster transaction injury report week. Hopefully not, but just the nature of the beast as you put the pads on. And ramp up the intensity. But yeah, for the first transaction to come on August 2nd is a good place to be.
Let's see. This gives them what? Deshaun Elliott, healthy. Jack Henderson at safety. Rayshawn Jenkins, Robert Spears Jennings. Who else is function at
Sebastian
safety?
Castro,
Sebastian
a little
Castro.
bit of Devon Boykin.
Right. And Brisker obviously as
Mhm.
well too within that there. So they it'd be interesting to hear your rotations, because we're not. I guess we'll wait. We'll know first thing Monday morning if any of those guys get removed from the PUP list. But it doesn't feel like that's going to happen. If there was anyone that's going to get, probably the first one off that list is likely to be Dante Kent, right?
It's just hard to tell on his ACL rehab recovery. He's been the most active guy working on the side of the three, Porter, Ramsey, and Kent. He's been doing spirited jogging and running and cutting, and Ramsey has just gotten back to some light jogging and stretching. So it's hard to guess at timelines. I would be surprised if any were activated tomorrow. Kent has certainly been working his way back. I've said before, I think he'll come back before training camp is my guess, but these things are always hard to pin down, and they generally take a little bit longer than you think for these guys to fully come back.
All right, we'll see what Mike McCarthy has to say about that in the morning.
We'll also know Jenkins' number. Don't know his jersey number, but I'll be sure to point it out assuming he takes the field for Monday, which I
All
assume
right.
he will, if it's not already reported by the team. They let you know what he's doing. Usually these guys used to be you get signed, you take a couple days, you're just watching from the side, you're in individual period. At least under Mike Tomlin, you jumped in right away, and I imagine it's probably full speed ahead with a vet under Mike McCarthy too.
All right.
All right, Dave, where else? Let's talk about some Steelers news and stay on that tab, you could say. Pittsburgh announced their 2026 Hall of Honor during Saturday's practice, or really right before Saturday's session. Three individuals, I should say, and I say that because one of them is a GM, former GM Kevin Colbert, will be inducted into the Hall of Honor. Also, the late player broadcaster Craig Wolfley and cornerback JT Thomas. So it's a very worthy class to add to a list of Steelers legends, Dave.
Yeah, let's see. The ceremony, the official induction ceremony for those three will be held on Friday, September 25th at Acrisure Stadium. The weekend the Steelers play the Cincinnati Bengals. So the three, obviously, this year that you just said, former GM Kevin Colbert, former defensive back JT Thomas, who, according to the media sheet, played in 116 regular season games, 88 starts over 8-year career with the Steelers, four-time Super Bowl champion, played in 13 postseason games, including several Super Bowls along the way there, four Super Bowls, registered 19 interceptions and two fumble returns for TD with the Steelers. The thing I remember as a kid with JT Thomas. And look, I mean, obviously you had the bigger names, in the secondary there with Shell and Wagner and Mel Blount, obviously, there. Man, that guy had some long arms. That's what I remember about JT Thomas. And what was he do you remember what I think when he came out, he was like 6'1", 198, I want to say,
Hmm.
on him. He was just a specimen. And if you look back, and how big and physical Mel Blount was, and several of those corners, I mean, that they had a type even way back then, for sure. But the one thing I remember and I think a couple of his football cards or a couple of the media pictures that you see, he used to get down in that real low kind of crouch at the line of scrimmage, and man, his arms would almost be hitting the ground at that point there. But obviously a good player and won several Super Bowls with the Steelers. Craig Wolfley needs no introduction overall. Obviously played for the Steelers. Quick thing with him. When I
Hmm.
was a kid, about I don't know, what was I, 11 or 12, my dad took me to Atlanta Fulton County Stadium for that preseason game. I think it was a Monday Night Football preseason game against the Falcons at Atlanta Fulton County Stadium there. And that was the first, obviously, live football game. It was preseason game. And the starters obviously didn't play a lot in that game there. But after the game, kind of congregated out around the buses and all like that. Got my picture taken with a few Steelers, Lynn Swan, I believe Franco Harris, and then another one was a couple of linemen, and one of those linemen ended up being Craig Wolfley at the time there. So, but obviously Craig Wolfley been, and I think that might have been his rookie season as well too. But Craig Wolfley, a very versatile lineman throughout his playing career. Then after his playing career, big part of the Steelers radio network, whether it be on the sideline or in the booth there, and did a lot of stuff, obviously, with Tunch Yokin, who sadly we had lost, several years before Craig Wolfley there. Those two were really kind of frick and frack, if you will. They were best friends and good tag team partners. They had the Tunch and Wolf show, obviously, on the radio for several seasons. Once internet radio really got started and going. So, a lot of people listening, even if they weren't alive for the careers of like Tunch and Wolf, they certainly knew both those guys after their careers because of the work that they did, on the radio and training camp. You'd see those guys all the time. And it's understandable. And, and unfortunately, obviously, Wolfley passed away just, fairly, what was it, last March. Last March. So it has been a little bit over a year now since that has happened there. So understandable there. And then Kevin Colbert obviously needs no introduction. General manager, came over from, what was it, the Detroit Lions, I think was part of their organization prior to coming to the Steelers, and played a big part in bringing the next two Super Bowls to Pittsburgh, and obviously went to a third Super Bowl there against the Packers. What was that, 2010 season there, and a big part of helping them put together a lot of those good teams there. And some will say, man, Kevin Colbert should have won a couple more championships, or at least a couple more AFC championships during his time. I get it. A lot of people will hyper focus in on the last, let's say, 5 years or 4 or 5 years of drafting of Kevin Colbert, but he belongs in the Hall of Honor, and is glad to see his time come, as early as it has here, because he's obviously only been out of the Steelers now for 4 years now, 5 years, something like that.
Well said, Dave, about all three, and I think all three are worthy. I mean, there's an endless number of worthy players and people that can be inducted, but this list is certainly part of that group. And you remember JT Thomas better than I do, but as somebody who certainly respects and has learned a lot about the Steelers' history, but that includes, of course, the 70s. Mel Blount obviously gets talked about as the premier Steelers corner, and he was, but JT Thomas was a really good corner in his own right, a one-time Pro Bowler, a big guy, long guy. And as you pointed out, had an interception in Super Bowl X to beat the Cowboys, and so he made some big-time plays as well. Just doesn't get the credit because he was playing next to a Hall of Famer and Steelers legend like Mel Blount. And Craig Wolfley, a guy I didn't watch play, but sort of Alan Faneca before. Alan Faneca, just this burly guard, but a good athlete, played tackle at one point later in his career when the team needed him there. And so a guy that did it all for the offensive line. And then, of course, I remember him most especially just for his time in the broadcast booth and just the funny mannerisms he would say, and just loved the game. Just a guy that truly loved football and made it fun. For as much as we analyzed the game and get so serious about it, and understandably so, it means a lot to us, it means a lot to people who listen, but it's a game. It's supposed to be fun, and I think Wolf made it fun. And so him and Tunch obviously had a great rapport, and unfortunate, as you said, Wolf is no longer with us to accept this honor, but it's great to get him inducted all the same. And then Kevin Colbert, I think about Kevin Colbert, as you said, I know some will push back on it. I think as a man, and not that I know Kevin Colbert, but just obviously listening to his press conferences, and he was at St. Vincent College on Saturday to be inducted or elected in person, and gave a short 40-second speech to the fan base. His humility, I think, is really rare for a position of power that he was in, to come in and just do the job quietly, not somebody who made a lot of waves or wanted to take a lot of credit for it, just happy to get the job done and worked really tirelessly at doing so. It was a pretty rare thing for a general manager to kind of have that humble mentality for a position that is so important. I just want to read off, Dave, his string of first-round picks to begin his tenure is just incredible if you really look back in retrospect and think about it. In 2000, Plexico Burress. In 01, Casey Hampton, traded down, still got him. 02, Kendall Simmons. '03, Troy Polamalu, traded up to get him. '04, Ben Roethlisberger. '05, Heath Miller. '06, Antonio Holmes. '07, Lawrence Timmons. It's hard to find a stretch of better first-round picks across the board than that group right there. I know it did get worse from there, and the last couple of years certainly had their share of misses, and Colbert was not nearly as effective, and I get all that, but the man helped bring 2 Super Bowls to Pittsburgh. That should be respected, and it certainly is by him being part of the Hall of Honor.
Yeah, a lot of those guys, obviously, well, all of them, at least second contract guys. Santonio Holmes, though, was it? And he traded him away at the right time, right? Come time to get rid of him, and obviously was around when Cam Hayward selection was made as well too. So yeah, I mean, look, you don't put together those Super Bowl quality teams that they had, and there were obviously disappointments along the way, and years that you thought, man, this team should have been better than what they were with the talent that they had, and it's always some recency bias seems to creep in there with some people. Well, what did he do lately? And yeah, was the back end of his drafting career great? Probably not overall, but I mean, if you look at it in totality, especially as you rolled through those first round picks to start his career, that was quite impressive as well too. And especially, this is an organization that has prided itself in building through the draft and developing and get guys to second contracts and not being overly active. Excuse me, in free agency, or really the trade market, things that we've seen recently with the acquisitions of like DK Metcalf and Michael Pittman Jr. That stuff would, never really happen, especially for the month. I mean, there were trades obviously that took place, but nothing where they were turning around and especially trading for players with high contract values such as that. Now, some will say that might be a fault of Kevin Colbert's later on in his career to not adjust to that. But then on the flip side, having to navigate through the COVID years was pretty tough on this team as well too, especially from the salary cap perspective, and then making a decision which was went across across the grain there with the void years and all. They had to do what they had to do to get cap compliant after COVID and all like that. So I think his resume as a whole speaks for itself. And I mean, how many general managers are out there that can say that they were part of 2 Super Bowl winning franchises? I mean,
great point.
That's
not many.
Not many, period. So to be able to say that in and of itself, I think kind of speaks volumes.
And a Pittsburgh kid, so I think it's really probably extra special for him to be inducted by the franchise because these are his roots. It's where he was born and raised, and as you said, came over from Detroit. But Pittsburgh is where he got his start, a lot of his values from, and went to Miami. I learned from Don Shula and others, and then I think went to Detroit and then came home to Pittsburgh. So a lot of good in his career, in his tenure as Steelers GM, and I think rightfully so to be inducted into the Hall of Honor. Just for sticklers out there, Plexico Burris also is not a multi-contract guy. He left after his contract was up. Just somebody will email us about that. But again, just a string of first-round picks. It's going to be hard to beat that by any GM in the future.
Yeah, look, I mean, if we're being honest here, they traded Plaxico away at the right time. They didn't want to pay him that big money at the time because of kind of the same situation to some degree as the San Antonio Holmes. Really, they didn't like the maturity aspect of him, and he was obviously regarded as one of the top wide receivers in the league come that time that they were going to pay him, and they decided to trade him away. So I realize Plaxico went on to win a Super Bowl after that and all, but you got to do what's best for the franchise at the time, and that's why he made the move. But they did get some quality years out of Plaxico before he left, and sometimes that happens, and sometimes you got to make the decisions to part with players that you had drafted early, and we've seen that obviously recently with kind of the George Pickens type situation.
And though I think one critique is Colbert was too inelastic and didn't make enough moves, the one move he did make later in his tenure, the one trade that was really of note, was Minkah Fitzpatrick in 2019. After Ben goes down for the season, where the season effectively feels over. It felt like, why are you trading and buying at that particular point? But there was a longer term vision that Colbert had to part with a first round pick, something the franchise hadn't done since the 60s, I think, under Buddy Parker, was a big risk. And I think the move worked out overall. So that was one calculation that Colbert made that certainly paid off.
Yeah, those first couple of years of Minka in Pittsburgh were fantastic, weren't they?
They were great.
And he was a part of winning a lot of a lot of games during that time as well too. So, be interesting maybe throughout this process here. We'll see how it goes the rest of the summer here. Maybe we could get Kevin, because I know we would have a list of questions.
What would be the first thing or the most pressing thing you would love to ask Kevin Colbert if given the chance?
I would like to ask him the whole guarantee, and I don't know even after the fact. There are several things that we even said, and I think even when Kevin Colbert was the general manager, you and I have kidded with each other over the time, saying, "Man, at one point, I hope he writes a book about this or that, the other." And I think some of the things that we talked about, I'd like to get into the guaranteed money and the Steelers really, for the most part, although they have bent on that a little bit, about the fully guaranteed money for non-quarterbacks past the first year. I'd like to talk about another thing with the league. A lot of teams in the league are utilizing the option bonuses now as a way to manipulate. I don't want to say manipulate, but kind of massage the cap in their favor a little bit more. And the Steelers have never done that. Now they have inherited contracts. Most recently, Jalen Ramsey's is one that had the option bonus. But I just want to hear his thoughts on the option bonus angle that teams are taking advantage of more and more these days, and the why behind that. Geez. I could probably, if you gave me 30 minutes with a piece of pen and paper, I could probably come up with several more. Those are just a few that come off the top of my head.
Yeah, I'm not sure the number one thing I'd like to ask him that I think I could get a pretty good answer from, but I'd like to hear the story about him trading down in the first round, which only happened one time, to acquire Casey Hampton, or the story of Ben in '04, or David DeCastro. That was like the one time he ever went out west, Colbert did, for a pro day, to Stanford's pro day, and lo and behold, DeCastro falls into their lap in, what was that, 2012? And so, yeah, I'd ask about Jarvis Jones and how the calculation
Right.
there.
Yeah.
I mean, there could be a lot of things there, but we'll see if we can make that happen someday.
Yeah, like I said, I'm sure if we both spent 30 minutes and not having to come up with it on the fly on a podcast here, we could come up with a good 50 questions for him. I don't know how truthful he would even be after the fact, but there's a lot of instances to go back and pick his brain on concerning his time with the Steelers that I would like to be able to do at some point, and hopefully he writes a book sometime about it.
All right, Dave, from a player quote standpoint, don't think there was anything too terribly of note recently. Really, the buzz is Pat Frymouth saving a child from a fight that broke out for autographs. I left. I know that area. It's right by where a lot of players sign post practice, but I was long gone. So just saw the video going around online, but craziness there. So I don't think there's any giant quote from a player. If you want to think of any, Dave, or heard any that caught your attention, let me know.
I'll tell you what, and this kind of plays into what we talked about the other day with Steelers that you root for and all. And we mentioned Jaquan Brisker and how excited that guy seems to be in Pittsburgh there. They talked to him after the practice the other day there. And, this guy, I think that interview kind of confirms it. And I think we talked about him having a huge contingent of family in town for the practice the other day there. And afterwards, this guy, I think, really, really enjoys so far Patrick Graham's defense, and playing for Patrick Graham, and how he's going to be utilized in the defense there. And I think that's kind of been the takeaway from several defensive players that have talked about Patrick Graham, at least through this first week of training camp here. So I think and I know the pushback's going to say, well, what is he going to say? He doesn't like Patrick Graham, but you could just say, and merely the transcripts and us writing about what he said doesn't do it justice. You could tell that when he was asked about Patrick Graham, the smile that he had, that this guy really enjoys playing for Patrick Graham. So I think that's at least one takeaway from one of the interviews there. I know Alex Highsmith met the media a couple of days ago, and of course he's gonna, he said all the right things about, he'd like to be a Steeler for life, and he doesn't sound too terribly worried about his contract. He obviously knows he's got to go out and play and have a good season this year. And with this team potentially not having to have a franchise quarterback, and look, I know we could spend another 30 minutes in this show about the Baker Mayfield speculation that's been going on for the last week. And yeah, I get it to some degree, but let's get through 2026 with Aaron Rodgers before we start going deeper down that rabbit hole there. But I guess what I'm trying to get to is, if you don't end up having to pay a quarterback 10, 12, 14, 20 million, $25 million next season with the cap continuing to escalate. Yeah, look, I know you've got potential of Joey Porter Jr. contract going to get done here pretty soon. And you obviously had Washington and a few other guys, Herbig and all like that. But I don't think it's totally out of the question just yet that potentially we could see Alex Highsmith sign another contract during next offseason. Now he's going to have to play like his hair is on fire once again in 2026 and stay healthy. But and obviously we'll have to see what happens with T.J. Watt as he gets another year longer in the tooth, or what kind of season he has and all. But I think the big takeaway there is Alex Highsmith isn't too terribly concerned about his future right now, and he evidently is hoping to continue his career in Pittsburgh past his current end of his contract year.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, there's not much else you can say. You don't want to make waves with comments right now, and Highsmith's never been that guy to begin with, and so I wouldn't expect him to speak out negatively. But he's going to be thinking about his future internally, because you do wonder what it will look like. Are they going to he'll be due for an extension and really kind of quote unquote eligible last year of his deal next offseason? But long ways to go. We'll see what this year brings, how Watt performs, and just how Highsmith is used, how all those pieces fit with three outside linebackers, and ditto with Baker Mayfield. It'll be a discussion point. Let's see what the heck happens. My thought is, if Baker has a big year, the Buccaneers aren't going to let him go. They're going to pay him whatever he wants. If he has a poor year, then why would Pittsburgh want him? And I think Pittsburgh's plan, based on re-signing guys like Darnell Washington and Nick Herbig and eventually Joey Porter Jr., is they're kind of doing that under the assumption they're not going to be paying the quarterback position a ton of money next year, whether that's Will Howard or Drew Aller or drafting a first-round guy. They're not going to go pay a guy 40, 50 million per year. And so they have that kind of baked into their financial plan that we can pay other positions instead. So not my feeling they're going to go out there and sign Baker Mayfield, but who the heck knows what will happen next year.
Yeah, and especially with Mike McCarthy at the beginning there saying he's been basically charged with getting the next franchise quarterback in place for this team. You would like to hope that that's going to happen sooner rather than later. And obviously, if you go out and get a guy like Baker Mayfield, you're going to prolong that by at least 1 year, possibly even two, if you go out and sign Baker Mayfield to a multi-year contract. But as soon as that Baker Mayfield stuff started to come out and things that he said this past week and all, you just knew that we were going to start heading down that road quicker than maybe we wanted to. And that's going to be the narrative hanging out there for quite a while. It feels like, at least when it comes to the Steelers potentially being an option. So we'll keep acknowledging it a little bit here and there, but I just don't want to spend a lot of time on that.
Sure. Same here. I know TJ Watt, Aaron Rodgers had their yearly camp interviews with Kyle Brandt of NFL Network /ESPN. Don't think there was any big revelation. They're fun interviews, and to talk about a little bit on their family life, Watt being a dad now, and Rodgers reconnecting with families, all well and good. Doesn't make for a lot of content for us to discuss. I thought it was notable Rodgers admitted that right after the Texans playoff loss, he basically thought 99% chance he was going to retire, especially after Mike Tomlin stepped down, and then Mike McCarthy's hiring reopened that door, and kind of said that initially it was a little slow for Pittsburgh and Rodgers to sort of get back together and chart out a plan for him to return in 2026. I kind of think back to the Pat McAfee conversation he had, whenever that was, in April, maybe, talking about no contract's been offered yet, but all's well that ends well, and for Rodgers, it's kind of full circle to be back with Mike McCarthy, to reunite with family, and just kind of be at peace and professionally and personal respects.
Yeah, and then the main takeaway I really had from TJ Watt, he said, he's talking about very sick and tired of the non-playoff win story at this point. He says, I feel like we've had great teams. It's just performing in the biggest moments. And like you said, we've had winning records every year I've been here, but it's just being a team that's continually on the rise and performing in January. People have heard me complain many, many times about not getting to the playoffs and then not advancing. So very sick and tired of that story. So here's to hoping that at the very least we can get past the TJ Watt not winning a playoff game in 2026 because he's tired of talking about it.
And I think he said very similar last year. So he's probably sick and tired of talking about being sick and tired. So very meta there, but hopefully that streak or drought ends this year. Anything else from the players, Dave?
Not off the top of my head.
A lot of praise for Robert Tonyan. I think we discussed that a little bit on the Saturday camp recap show. And so he's feeling right at home as he reunites with Aaron Rodgers and Mike McCarthy.
All right. You've had most of Sunday to go back through your notes from the first 4 days of practice. Any further takeaways from what you have observed through the first 4 days, and what are you looking forward to observing on Monday?
No, not really any new takeaways. Obviously, when the pads come on, it just feels like football again, even though we know Pittsburgh won't be tackling, will still be a lot more intense evaluation. I want to see, does practice look any different, or what is the structure of a padded practice versus the unpadded practices in the ramp up period they just concluded? So, will it be backs on backers? Will there be any sort of one-on-one competition drills, which have been absent so far in training camp? Doesn't sound like it, but we'll see. Obviously, when you put the pads on, the run game becomes more of a focus. It's really been pass game oriented these first couple of practices. The trenches you can evaluate a whole lot more effectively. So to get eyes, close look at Maxi Honachor, Gabriel Rubio, just the overall O-line, D-line play, Spencer Anderson, Brock Hoffman, some of the new faces on both sides of the O-line and D-line groups. So that's always capturing my attention, the split between Rico Dowdle and Jalen Warren as the run game sort of takes center stage here. All things I want to start watching for.
Do you think they're going to continue with the two fields thing when the pads go on?
Probably. I know McCarthy talked about that before Saturday's practice to really maximize reps. And after the 2011 CBA came in that put a lot of restrictions on how long you could be on the field for, his calculation was, how do I still maximize and get a similar amount of reps in, and doing simultaneous 11-on-11 periods. I think, what is it called? Spot 2 periods is the best way to do that, which I think is smart. It's not great for our note-taking purposes, but it is good for the players. So I imagine that will continue, but we'll have to wait and see.
Let me ask you what you would have maybe done different had you known what to expect in the first 4 days. In other words, if this was, say, it was your second training or third training camp covering Mike McCarthy as a head coach, what didn't you do that you wish you would have done, or what would you have done differently had you known how things were going to go in the first 4 days, if anything?
I'm not sure there's much to do differently. I was happy to get to watch the twos during the last two practices during that dual 11-on-11 period to get more familiar with those names. So that was good. But I mean, you just have to make a choice. You can't watch both and really chart it with a lot of. I mean, I was able to watch, on Saturday's practice with the twos. I was charting those reps, and then I was kind of squeezing in a couple of notables with the ones. When the twos rep was done, I could kind of get my eyes towards the ones for a second. It was just closer to me too, so I could kind of see some of the plays that were naturally made, like the TJ Watt interception off of Aaron Rodgers. So, yeah, I don't know if there's a lot I do differently. It's just something different to adjust to, and its own different evaluation and lens. And the one thing I would say is, it's not something I would do maybe differently, but one kind of caution, even when I maybe tweet out some stuff and others have too, this guy's running first team now, or this guy's getting a look, or this guy's playing over this guy. There's just so much rotation that's been happening in camp. It's hard to really know how much that means something in terms of, this guy's leapfrogging this guy, or they just want to give this guy a chance in his kind of turn to show what he can do. Like when Lou Nichols is playing with the ones during the 2-minute drill, on Saturday. Does that mean he's leapfrogging Caleb Johnson? I'd be hesitant to draw that conclusion so directly. So obviously, he's not leapfrogging Rico Dowdle or Jalen Warren. They just probably want to give Nichols a chance because Warren and Dowdle and Johnson have gotten chances the last couple 2-minute drills in earlier practices. So there's just been a lot of mixing and matching, and it's hard to know what is just kind of giving guys a look and some reps versus, okay, this guy's climbing the ladder.
All right. I agree with that. It's easy to read too much into the information that you and others provide.
Anything you're hoping to hear about or see, because half of practice is still basically live streamed.
Man, you know me right now. I'm ready. I'm just ready for the preseason now. And look, I take my notes off of what you report and what I see as well too to kind of get things to kind of ask you about. So my view day to day, especially when it comes to the podcast that we do and the recaps in the evening, generally gets formulated throughout a day. Make sure to ask Alex about this or I heard about this. So, I mean, you continue to be my eyes and ears, and I take a lot of what you say into account as far as what I'm starting to try to do right now is I try to get my mind ready of what to look for in the preseason games, whether it be groupings and who's playing what side, those kind of things. And as has been the case for several years now, you have me really prepared by the time the first preseason game happens. That I'm not struggling to look what's left or right here with the offensive line and which group is this at the line, because I already got a pretty good idea on that. So a lot of what I look for in the preseason is just a lot of confirmation of what you have already written out there. So it's not so much of what I am looking for. Now, look, I love to hear and read about the backs on backers type stuff, especially the backs performances in there, because it's a drill that's really slided it's balanced heavily for the defensive players in those situations. But other than that, I just take it in daily and just try to get notes together of things to ask you as we get together later in the afternoon.
Right, and it might be a little harder to suss out teams and how the preseason will look because of these simultaneous periods, but we do know who's running with the ones and who's running with the twos, and I had that sort of mini depth chart mapped out for the Friday practice, and so still a lot of good information. But yeah, just excited for football to really feel like football. I mean, so far it's been some plays to be made, and talked up Asante Samuel a ton and some of the standouts early on, but it's been a lot of spring work where you can't hit. Obviously, contact is very limited. The defenders have to pull off, and it just hasn't felt like football. Still has kind of felt like just spring ball, 7-on-7, this flag football-ish sort of vibe. And even sans tackling, it's going to change, and the defense really will be able to make some plays, I think, this time, starting Monday.
And I imagine he'll ease them into the pads on Monday, right?
I don't know. I mean, if it's like Tomlin, there was no really easing with Tomlin. It was here, we're here to work. And so I don't know. Not even sure what that exactly looks like, but we'll only know that once we get a full week of padded practice in and kind of see how this thing ebbs and flows. But typically when the pads come on, the run game becomes more of that central focus. And we can start kind of talking about the trenches a lot more than we have so far.
All right, count on me asking you right off the top if how it compared to maybe a Tomlin first padded practice when we get together on Monday evening there. All right, you ready for some couple of emails? It's been a couple of shows since we've been able to get to a couple of listener emails here. So let's start with David Haig, and he's from Pittsburgh, Kansas, and that's
the one without the H.
That's the Pittsburgh without the H there. So, and I know he's emailed in before. So David asked, "Hey folks, thanks for the extra coverage during camp. I've listened for about 2 full seasons now, and post draft and camp coverage are some of my favorite parts." He says, "It looks like Asante Samuel Jr. has benefited somewhat from JPJ being out for the first few training camp sessions. Are there other players you think benefit from other players being on the PUP list? Are there any safeties who have shown out while getting more first-team reps filling in for Ramsey?" All right, Alex, that's a question for you.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, at safety, we talked about Robert Spears Jennings getting a lot of work with the ones because of the lines being short with Savage not working in full, Elliott being a partial, Ramsey on pup. And so it's not that Spears Jennings has made maybe any particular play that stood out. He has it, at least in terms of something super impactful, an interception, pass breakup, what have you. But just getting those quality reps when you're facing DK Metcalf and Aaron Rodgers and just the one offense is always, I think, important for a rookie to grow and really kind of learn trial by fire. Sebastian Castro picked off Will Howard in that 2-minute drill, so he got elevated reps too with the twos. So just that line, being short helps out others. Dalen Everett probably getting some more cornerback reps behind because Porter is now on PUP, and so Samuel jumps with the ones, and Everett gets bumped up, and it just is good for Everett as he faces DK Metcalf more often than he probably otherwise would. And so those are just kind of names that come to mind.
All right, Jim Bendis is back in here. He says, hey, guys, can you take some pictures of the new buildings at St. Vincent and Mr. Rogers' statue? All right, well, maybe Alex can get with Tim Rice and see if we can include maybe a couple of pictures of the new buildings and the Mr. Rogers statue out there at St. Vincent College. All right, let's try one more here from Shane Glass. Thanks as always for being the leading voice of Steelers training camp. I have a more lighthearted question for y'all. Which was harder to get used to? Your first time ever covering Steelers training camp, or this year, the first time you're covering it when someone other than Mike Tomlin is running it? That's obviously a question for you, Alex.
It's hard to even think back about the first training camp. I was still, I think, in college, I want to say, or just out of college. And so it's probably been tougher this camp because I've gotten into such a routine of Mike Tomlin and his practices and what to expect and just the ebb and flow of it all. And back then, you didn't know what you didn't know, and I was even dumber back then. And so you just kind of fly by the seat of your pants, and it's kind of no expectations. You just kind of see what happens. And so it's probably tougher this time around, being that creature of habit and having to sort of unlearn how Tomlin did it and adjust to McCarthy. That day one was tough. Not that this is all first world problems, obviously. Here I'm not in the coal mines, but it was just tough to adjust. My head was spinning. It certainly slowed down since. So probably tougher this time around.
Could you imagine having to cover it back when Chuck Noll
I wonder what a practice was like back then. I mean, obviously they had two-a-days, but what just any practice?
You probably
was
have
like
to. I mean, with the two-a-days and all like that, you'd probably drop too, wouldn't you? You'd probably get worn out from being out in the sun as long as they probably were out from out there. But yeah, I imagine, and you're like me in the way that you don't embrace change very well, and you get very routine-ish and OCD-ish, I imagine, with things that even you do out there. I mean, heck, you probably sit in the same spot
I do
every
pretty
time
much.
that you go out there. And so I imagine it has been some adjustment for you through these first 4 days here. Okay, Alex, we got through a handful of questions there. We've managed to eat up about 45 minutes for a Monday morning podcast, which once again recorded late Sunday night here. You and I will be back on Monday evening when you get back from Latrobe and file your daily recap diary, as we like to call them, and then we'll proceed from that point forward. So until about 24 hours from now. So you can follow me on Twitter at Steelers Depot. Follow Alex at Alex_Kozora. Follow the show at Terrible Podcast. Email the show, theterriblepodcast@gmail.com. If you like what we do and want to donate to the cause, SteelersDepot.com, hit the donate button. Also, we invite you to take advantage of our ad-free version of the site. You can get that by going to SteelersDepot.com, find the ad-free button, and follow the directions and sign up that way as well. So, as always, thanks for listening to the Terrible Podcast with Dave and Alex.